guys, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be just talking about the summary of what happened in the winter episode of Gilmore Girls: A Year in the Life. So make sure you stay tuned and follow along. Okay, so the anticipation for the winter episode and all the Gilmore Girl episodes or mini movies was really intense. I was super excited about it, and my expectations for it were very high. So at the beginning, when we hear the flashback voices of the original series, I got all the feels. I was crying, I was excited, and I was like, this is the perfect way to open the show. One thing that I really liked about every episode of the revival is that they had the seasons. They had like an intro to the movie. So it'd be like they'd have a little intro period, and then winter would show up or fall would show up. I really liked that about the mini movies. So going on to winter, we see Lorelai sitting at the gazebo in Stars Hollow at the very beginning, and she's holding a coffee and she seems to be waiting on someone. And then pretty soon we see Rory come up behind her, and then just immediately they begin their Gilmore Girl banter back and forth about how great Rory looks after getting off of a plane from London. Okay, so after Rory and Lorelai's banter, we get a little update about the townspeople of Stars Hollow. So we run into Taylor Dosey, and he has an issue about the sewer lines in Stars Hollow. And then we run into Lane, who looks younger than ever. And then we also run into Kirk and hear about his new business adventure called an Uber, which is the same as Uber. And as well as we get to see that he has a pig named Petals that the town all chipped in and got him because him and Lulu were talking about having kids, which I just thought was hilarious. And then we get to see Luke's diner for a second and see that Luke has added no man buns on the list of things not to do in his diner. So then after that, it goes to the Gilmore Girls and Luke's home. And we see Luke cooking in the kitchen, bragging about and being so prideful about Rory's piece in the New Yorker. And he has about a bajillion copies of it because he's just so proud. And then we get to see the Gilmore Girls, as usual, eating junk food and Luke getting annoyed. You know, some things never change. And then we hear a knock at the door, and a new character pops in, and it's Paul. And Paul is Rory's boyfriend. It's kind of a part of the episode's main gag, as well as the rest of the miniseries gag, because Rory is such a flighty person that she has this boyfriend that she doesn't really remember, and none of them remember, Lorelai or Luke, and they've met him before. Okay, so later in the episode, we get to see Luke and Lorelai upstairs in their bedroom, and I love this part of the episode because I think as a Gilmore Girl, and as all of you are, I think we all wanted to see Luke and Lorelai be a happy and fun couple, and we get to see this in this part of the episode. And they banter back and forth, and they're able to do literary references back and forth, and I just love it. And then they go to bed, and Lorelai wakes up because she's had a nightmare about dirty bathrooms, and she hears a weird noise downstairs, so she goes to check it out, and Rory is tap dancing to relieve stress, which I think is funny. And then Lorelai and Rory get to talking, and Rory's just telling her mom, you know, she has a lot of irons in the fire, and she's just going, I think everything's pulling her in all these directions, so she's stress tapping to relieve that stress. And Lorelai's telling Rory about how she's feeling her mortality lately, and then there's this funny joke about going on a cruise, which I thought was funny. When you're getting older, I feel like older people tend to go on cruises. And then Richard Gilmore gets brought up, and I immediately started bawling. Again, that's in my Gilmore Girls revival reaction that I'll link below. I definitely cried when Lorelai started tearing up about Richard. So after that scene, it goes to the Dragonfly Inn, and we get to see Michelle and Lorelai talk back and forth, and we get a little update on Suki. and Michelle says to Lorelai that she's abandoned us. And I kind of got that vibe throughout the episodes. But the reason that Suki's not in the first episode is because she's off on a cooking sabbatical, and she was only supposed to be gone for 6 months, but it ended up being a year, and so they're just kind of in la la land with if she's coming back or not. So after time at the Dragonfly, we see that Lorelai is with Gypsy, getting her car fixed. So what ends up happening is she has to call Kirk, the Uber driver, for a ride to Hartford, Connecticut for the Friday night dinner. And then once she shows up at the Friday night dinner, her and Rory see this massive picture of Richard Gilmore, and immediately Lorelai starts the classic bantering and harping on her mother about how she got the dimensions wrong and how this is just a ridiculous picture, and we see the tension building, and then Emily just walks out of the room, and she's upset with Lorelai because she's just harping on her. And then Lorelai and Rory start talking, and Lorelai tells Rory what happened at the funeral a few months back. So then we go back a few months, and we see the funeral of Richard Gilmore, which is just incredibly sad. The song that they have playing behind it, gives you all the feels. And so we see Richard being buried, and we're at the burial, and then it goes to later at the Gilmore household, and there's a wake there, and there's just a small group at the end that they're just all talking about Richard, and Emily asks them to all share a special memory that they have of Richard. And it comes to Lorelai's turn, and she cannot think of anything, so she's just trying to creep out of the circle so that she doesn't have to tell a memory. But then it comes to her anyway, and she tells this myriad of stories that shed a bad light on Richard. And Emily, of course, gets upset, and that causes a huge fight between Lorelai and Emily. And that scene ends, and it goes back to the present day, and Rory makes, a comment like, "You couldn't just say he's well-read." And then later that night, Lorelai asks Luke if if he ever regretted not having a fresh kid or a kid that was completely theirs. And Luke said he was completely happy, but Lorelai, she has those questions is he really happy? And so that next day they end up going to a surrogacy place called Dynasty Makers, I believe it is. And of course, of all people who run it, it's Paris Geller. And Paris is just a one-of-a-kind person. She just makes all these comments about people that she's impregnated. And then across the pond, we see that Rory is meeting with a famous woman, Naomi Shropshire, and she wants to write a book with her, an autobiography on her life. And this woman is just, all over the place, doesn't really seem to be wanting to write a book, but they make a deal anyway. And then we get to see that Rory is staying with Logan while she's in London, and they have sort of a friends with benefits relationship, which I am against. Again, if you watched other videos I've made, I am Team Jess all the way. So I wasn't too happy when I saw this relationship going on, especially since they're just, they're only boyfriend and girlfriend or whatever they are when it's convenient for each other, and I don't like that at all. Plus, Rory was keeping it from Lorelai, and I didn't like that part of it either. I forgot to mention that earlier, Luke and Lorelai left the Dynasty Makers place that Paris Geller runs, and Luke was totally against having a kid via surrogacy. And so then after we see the scene in London, it goes back to Stars Hollow, and Paris is in Luke's diner, and she's trying to make nice with Luke because she can tell that he was off. He was against doing the surrogacy, so she brought two of her best gals to his diner. And then Rory meets up with Paris, and they kind of hang around each other. And we hear that Paris and Doyle are actually getting a divorce, and we hear that Paris has 2 children that are twins. And that's basically the update of Paris. And then we get to see Hep Alien performing or, practicing in Lane and Zach's house. And we get to see Zach, which I thought Zach looked pretty old. I thought Lane looked much younger than him. Maybe they are, I don't know. And Steve and Quan are doing well, and we get to see all of those characters, so I liked that part of this episode. So then finally, towards the end of this episode, we see Lorelai going over to Emily Gilmore's house, and Emily's just kind of having a breakdown. She's just getting rid of everything in her house. She read the Marie Kondo book, Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, and is just getting rid of everything that does not bring her joy. And this is just completely out of Emily's character. And Lorelai says a sweet thing like, nothing's going to bring you joy now. They're both grieving about Richard and his loss. And we experience like a short-lived sweet moment between them. And then Emily goes on about how, Lorelai's living with Luke and Luke's just a roommate and how they're not married, and then that starts something. And Lorelai ends up mentioning to Emily that maybe she should go see a therapist to be able to talk through things about Richard's death. And then later we see Luke and Lorelai walking around town at a festival with Paul Anka, who is dressed in like a Luke's getup. He has a plaid shirt on and a hat. Hilarious. But anyway, so they're walking around, and Lorelai gets a phone call from Emily saying that she took her advice and that she's going to counseling, and basically wants Lorelai to meet her there to see how it goes. And then after she hangs up, Luke's like, you totally got invited to go to therapy with your mother. And she's like, crap, I did. And then that's basically the end of the winter episode. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And make sure you hit that subscribe button to follow along. I'm going to be doing more episodes, especially episodes about the revival. And I'm going to be going through recaps of the other 3 seasons, spring, summer, and fall. So you won't want to miss out on that, because where I lead, you should follow. So anyways, it's been great talking with you guys, and I hope that you have a wonderful day. See you next time. Bye.